This seems like a particularly auspicious time to bring these two men together in this iconic space, to look back and to look forward. It's the 9th day of the 9th month of the 9th year of the 21st century, and for all of us who are interested in numbers, this is a very cool date. It's also 150 years since the publication of On the Origin of Species and the founding of the Museum of Comparative Zoology. It's a time when genomic sequencing is giving new life to historic collections, when Harvard researchers are breaking new ground in the study of biodiversity, in stem cell research, and are building molecular machines with curvy DNA that may one day be able to deliver drugs to precise spots within the body. It's also a time when, after a long, long period in the desert, we have a president who believes in science. So it's a great time to have this discussion, and we're honored that Robert Krulwich, who is himself a star, has agreed to moderate. Robert graduated from Columbia Law School in 1974 and abandoned the law almost immediately thereafter. It turned out to be a good thing for him, I think, and certainly a good thing for all of us who have seen or heard him on ABC, PBS, on The Jay Leno Show, or on NPR, where he's now correspondent for the science desk, among many other responsibilities. He's been called the most inventive network reporter in television, the man who makes dismal science swing, that's not an issue tonight, and the man who simplifies without being simple. He has, over the past 30 years, helped to translate complex issues in science and technology, from the Human Genome Project to nanotechnology to fuel cells and hydrogen-powered cars, as well as topics in economics and culture. This is a guy who has won an American Association of Science Excellence in Television Award for a Nova Special, Cracking the Code of Life, a Polk Award for his coverage of the savings and loan scandal, and an Emmy for an ABC special on the history of Barbie, among many other awards. He's also funny. So when we sat down to think about a moderator for this event, he was the obvious choice. He did ask me when we were talking yesterday, why me? Well, it's clear. So he will introduce our two speakers. Please join me now in welcoming Robert Krulwich, Jim Watson, and Ed Wilson.
All right. I have the distinct honor this afternoon to bring here with me onto the stage, after a 50 or so year pause, two of the most intriguing, most original, most eminent scientists in the world. Both of them first came to Harvard back in the 1950s. When they arrived here, they were both young bucks in their 20s, looking for tenure, both ambitious, with very different scientific agendas. One liked to study critters, the other was very interested in genes. They were assigned offices in the same building, one floor between them, over the biological labs. They apparently rarely spoke, and when they did, it was not exactly, lovely. Yet, in their distinctly different ways, these two men not only challenged each other, together they've over and over and over again helped us challenge the way we think about biology, the way they have changed the way we study living things, and they keep changing it and changing it and changing it. And somehow, and we're going to find out how now, their once rather fierce rivalry has become a very warm and kind of, as far as I can tell, trusting friendship. Plus, they seem to have a pretty good time along the way. Each one has become so eminent, like their job titles take your breath away. I mean, literally, in Ed's case, Ed is, let's see if I can do this without gasping, the Pellegrino University Research Professor in Entomology for the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. He's also a member of the National Academy of Sciences, winner of the U.S. Medal of Science, winner of 2 Pulitzer Prizes, first for On Human Nature and then with Bert Holdobler for The Ants. He's won the Lewis Thomas Prize for writing about science. He's won the Nierenberg Prize. He's won the TED Prize. He's won a Time Magazine's 23 Most Influential People in America. And way back in 1944 in Alabama, after just a few years in the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts, starting as a tenderfoot, he rose all the way to the level of Eagle Scout and then became a distinguished Eagle Scout, a level beyond which there is nothing higher. So, this is... So this guy over here on my right is the ant scholar, the ecologist, the radical environmentalist, the sociobiologist, and the Cub Scout extraordinaire. This is Edward O. Wilson. Now over here, James Dewey Watson was 25 when he and Francis Crick discovered the structure of the DNA molecule. So a few years later, when he arrived at Harvard, he wasn't exactly a nobody. He was going to be an assistant prof, but already, whoa. So, for the next 12 years or so, he championed the study of genes and proteins and cells, which was called microbiology, with his usual flair, we'll call it. Then he moved on to the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in Long Island and became one of really the great directors, recruiters, and fundraisers in the science world. He spawned more projects, found more talent, and funded it than pretty much anybody. Then he helped establish the Human Genome Project at the National Institute of Health. He's the author of easily one of the greatest, certainly one of the most popular science books ever written, The Double Helix. More recently, he penned a memoir called Avoid Boring People, Lessons from Life in Science. I assume this was some sort of afterthought. Then he won the Lasker Prize, he also won the Lasker Prize, the Benjamin Franklin Medal, the Charles A. Dana Award, the Copley Medal, the Liberty Medal, the Lomonosov Medal, the Nobel Prize, and in 1971, Queen Elizabeth made him an honorary knight, which means you can't call him Sir James. That's not allowed because it's one of those honorary things just for foreigners. I mean, the year he got his, quote, knighthood, so did Steven Spielberg. But if he wants to, Jim can put on his stationery James Watson, KBE. So here is the honorary Knight Commander in the Order of the British Empire, Jim Watson, world-class biologist. Okay, so my assignment here is to go to the bad old days and then go on to the brave new world. So back in the 1950s, there were 2 factions in the biology department here. Ed, what were the 2 factions and what were they arguing about?
Well, there were the organismic and evolutionary biologists who were working on classification, anatomy, habits, and so on, or as they were labeled by the young Jim Watson upon arriving at Harvard, the stamp collectors. Then, on the other side, was the new molecular biologist. And they landed in the biology department at Harvard, like, a group of aliens in Manhattan. And Jim then inaugurated what was the signal achievement of the second half of the 20th century, which was the rise of molecular and cell biology. And Jim was a young avatar of this movement. Everybody knew he was going to get a Nobel Prize, and quick. And he was brought here as an assistant professor. Were they out of their minds? What happened was then, in a moment of short-sightedness, I was called by Stanford University. I was invited to come very early as a tenured professor. Harvard moved quickly and gave me tenured professorship, associate professorship at Harvard, and they forgot to do it for Watson.
Yeah, but how long did that mistake last?
I don't know. I thought it might have lasted 72 hours. How long did it take, Jim, before they realized a colossal mistake?
Did you notice that he got tenure?
Oh, yeah. I was, the story is sort of that Ed was, offered tenure, and then the question was raised, well, shouldn't I be offered tenure?
I heard you like walked up the stairs.
And then there was, they had the outside, an ad hoc committee which reported back to the, which met with the president and recommended that both of us be promoted. And so this message went to the department, which decided, well, they wanted to know me better before they did it. And I think there was probably the alternative. I could have joined the chemistry department. But then I would have had to teach chemistry, which I really don't know and don't like very much. So I belonged in the biology department. But then the university, I think, had a very strong dean, McGeorge Bundy, who I think let Frank Carpenter know that maybe the biology department would have difficulty getting future appointments unless they had acted on me. So I was promoted, and but really Ed and I didn't have anything to talk to about. There was no reason for us to talk to.
Well, wait, let me stop you.
Well, we lived in different worlds. My aim was, to get a critical mass of molecular biologists at Harvard, and so I wanted every appointment to be in the new field. Compromises emerged, and so there were a number of appointments, which I think on the whole were rather mediocre compromises. Not Ed, I'm just saying that's my belief.
So wait.
And I'm reputed to have made the remark, and that I'm a really evil person, that Harvard should not waste a tenure position on an ecologist.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
Wait.
one of the
I'm going to quote from text, from someone else's text. You said about Fred Smith's nomination, anybody who would hire an ecologist is out of his mind.
Well, I think I was right. Now, the reason is I really, at the University of Chicago, I virtually majored in ecology. I took every ecology course conceivable. I knew what was in the courses. I liked it, but I did not think it was very intellectually demanding. It was not going to bring necessarily highly into. I know there's Robert MacArthur, there's one person who tragically died early, who you might say was really a smart ecologist. But on the whole, smart people did not go into ecology. That's all I'm trying to say. And so that's all I'm trying to say. You need ecologists. You don't need all fields to be bright people. But I think what's really, what was the great thing about Harvard, at least then, was it really tried to say we have the best people in the world. The faculty, before you could make a tenured appointment, you had to say, was there someone else out in the world better? And if there was someone else there, the offer would go to him. Now Harvard doesn't ask that anymore. I think it's a disgrace that, how can you be the world's best university unless you have the world's best faculty? I don't think people here quite know how to deal with it, but it's a real problem, and I think it would be very depressing for the United States if Harvard did not contain the brightest people. It contains very bright students. Why shouldn't the faculty be bright?
Okay. Well, was Jim kind of right a little bit? I mean, after all, we're talking 1956, 1957, 1958. If you can figure out what these A's and C's and T's and whatevers are doing, how they can create genes and genes create proteins. If you can figure that out, you're figuring out a lot. So wasn't he right to push more and more of the genie people in, even if some of the butterfly people had to move aside?
He was right.
Well, I mean, right now,
Hey, you just went around.
I know, I did run around.
But, you have to allow me a postscript on that.
Yes, let him have a
What my colleague, I was the only young professor. Jim was the only young professor, and his side I was the only one left. We had a young professor of any rank, and we had quite a few distinguished, but how should I put it, settled professors in organismic and evolutionary biology. Now, what should have been done was what I then pushed to do, which is say, all right, who are the coming stars in organismic and evolutionary biology? And we should have recruited Robert MacArthur right away, and several others who were scattered around the country. So what I was doing soon after it, I was saying to myself, good Lord, molecular biology is the future, unless we can somehow assemble a group of the brightest young men. They were men then. Fortunately, we have brilliant ladies now. If the best could get together in this field we were calling population biology, use that as a foundation discipline comparable to, molecular, organic, natural products, organic chemistry, biochemistry, as foundational, and then reconstitute, redo, rework, and move ahead fast in fields like biogeography and species formation theory and biodiversity. We'll catch up, and then we'll get balance in a department like that, but this department did not do that. Let me quickly add that what happened over the years was that bright people did appear increasingly in these more complex fields of organismic and evolutionary biology. I realize I'm getting dangerously serious in tone here, but I get to go through this exercise. And of course, molecular biology had a bacterial explosion of people and ideas. But the result of this was that as molecular and cell biology matured, it produced an armamentarium of methods, ideas, and so on, which we started grabbing hold of. Right. And before long, evolutionary organismic biology, the study of diversity, was moving. It stayed where it was. We were still collecting bugs and, classifying, but we were moving in our analyses down to include molecular data, especially DNA, genomic, while the molecular and cell biologists started going evolutionary.
Right, so there was a general. But let me ask you about this period and also about the culture of science generally, because a lot of people here are not scientists. There was a kind of either or, screw you kind of way of talking during this period. And I don't know, like I've had reporters come to us from the science world, and they'll come into the newsroom and they'll start talking, like trash talking other reporters. They'll give an edit and it'll be brutal. And I'm thinking, like, come on, why are you talking that way? Like, you had a grad student named Alfred Goldberg called Fred.
Yeah, yes.
You said, this is what you said to him one time.
He was an undergraduate, spectacular undergraduate.
Spectacular undergraduate.
Yeah.
And he loved to talk to you. So you said to him, Fred, there are some people I like to see once a week, and there's some people I like to see every 2 weeks. I think you're one of my 2-week people. Fred said, well, you have to have an ego. So what I'm kind of wondering, and you've had water poured on top of your head by people, and and you've had to sort of stand tough against. I'm wondering, like, can a gentle person do world-class science, or do you all?
No, it's extremely. Jesus would not have succeeded. Yeah, and even if he were God, he would have still had problems. And no, I think you have to be somewhat assertive. You have to want to be there first, because it sort of proves that you want to prove that you're good. How do you know unless you're first?
But do you have to? Well, do you have to though, like here, another one of your grad students. This is Mario Capecchi. You're going to be hung by your grad student. He says, you have to have an enemy. He says, it doesn't matter if the enemy's real or not, but it's vital to getting your postdocs and your grad students to work as hard as they can, fight somebody. Is that your sense that you should proceed as a bunch of Marines?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we're young people, it works with boys anyways. And, yeah. And, I mean, we were competing at that time against Norton Zinder's lab at the Rockefeller, and we won most of the time. Largely because I think my brightest students were brighter I wasn't brighter than Norton, but boy, Capecchi was a lot brighter than anyone that Norton had. And so, and Murray himself, he wanted to be there first.
Well, but isn't there another way? Like you wrote in your book, and this is the opening sentence of one of the chapters, without a trace of irony, I can say I have been blessed with brilliant enemies. Why did you use the word blessed?
Well, because you, as I think it was John Stuart Mill who said that teacher and learner alike fall asleep at their post if there is no enemy in the field.
Oh, so
You
like him a little bit?
Well, rhetorically, yes. But it was a wonderful enemy. And even later, when I had, I think that I can describe them in the most generous possible terms, the radical left after me, because they believe that ideas like there's a biological human nature were outrageous. And I was physical attacked. Yes, I had water dumped on me at a AAAS meeting, and I loved it because I knew I was making history. I was the only scientist in modern times to be physically attacked because of an idea. Top that, Jim.
Yeah, no.
Anyway,
Come on, you don't really. When the water poured over your head, you thought, got it. Like now
No, it was a very
Yeah. Yeah. I
And-
said this, well, actually, there was no merit to this ideologically based assault that lasted for several years after the publication of my book, Sociobiology.
Oh, no,
I wasn't worried about
serious people.
I wasn't worried about the way it was going to turn out. But when the attacks are outrageous, there always appears to be some logic in there, and you can figure out, it's like listening to Rush Limbaugh. Normally, you would listen to Rush Limbaugh to find out what high school graduates in Oklahoma are thinking. However, Rush Limbaugh does indeed have a...
Don't applaud, don't applaud.
Oh, that's right. This isn't being broadcast.
No.
Yeah, but
I think it was.
but just to finish, Rush Limbaugh, like the radical left critics of the 70s here at Harvard, were formulating thoughts that others might have. And, they were using arguments that were ridiculous, but you needed to know what they were. And you needed to be able to respond definitively to them. So that's what I meant.
Yeah. I began really to come close to Ed because I hated Ed's enemies. So, and I won't mention the particular one here on the Harvard faculty. Well, Don't, but I mean.
But now, would you just for style's sake, this guy has gone and done kind of a preacher's tour. He's professed certain questions about his own private belief in God, but he's going around preacher after preacher after preacher to talk about biodiversity, and he hangs with what might be his opponents, but he's corralling them. And would you ever do anything like that?
What, be with my opponents?
No, wait a minute. What are you talking about
Well, I'm
here?
talking about like.
Are you talking about my evangelical allies?
Yes, I'm talking about your evangelical allies and your strategic business of going around the United States and going to churches and talking about biodiversity, being at least semi-comfortable with biblical references and all this stuff. I can't imagine.
All right, don't let him speak first. You better let me clear this up.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I want to come back to the subject of ambition, competitiveness. Oh yeah, those are essential to doing really good work. You have to be that way. I don't show it as much as Jim because I'm a Southerner. However, being a Southerner and raised as an evangelical before I became, a non-believer, I realized that we were in a situation in the worldwide conservation movement where we weren't getting it across to the people that we have to save species now, otherwise the living world is just going to deteriorate. And I think we had the core of environmental supporters, we had ecologists, we had a lot of really dedicated people in the public at large, but the mass of people were not interested, it seemed, in saving biodiversity, the ecosystems and the species living in them. And then I asked myself, who are the people? They are the religious. 75% are religious. 42% are evangelicals. So it occurred to me that somehow we have to get them activated. Otherwise, our political leadership will never move, because we are, as you've seen in the last several presidential elections, has been on a knife edge, so that any slight change in mood, any small issue can tilt it. Therefore, they will not respond to issues like conservation unless it becomes up from the bottom. So I figured it out that what we need to do is treat conservation as a transcendent issue. And therefore, in the book, The Creation, I address a apostrophic Southern Baptist minister. Apostrophic is a Harvard word for imaginary. And I said to him, speaking therefore to the evangelicals, primarily the religious people especially, but everyone, but to include them, and say, we have huge differences in our worldviews, our beliefs, but we could if we got together as friends on this one issue and just didn't worry about all that other stuff, we could do wonders. And actually, it has worked in part. I've even had a visit with the Mormon leadership.
Well, let me ask you a question in that regard, or not in that regard, actually. You were arguing in the 1950s that Harvard, and you just argued it a few minutes ago, that Harvard scientists should concentrate on topics that are important, that they should be the smartest ones in town, that the topics should be ripe for experiment, and that hot, important, and dazzling science is the science you wanted to do. And you taught your students to think big. You took your name off the papers and made them into stars. I'm wondering, why do you think that scientists should try to be stars?
It's better to be bright than dim.
It's better to be bright than dim.
Yeah, I mean, dim-witted. I mean, dim, why not shine?
Why flash when you can simmer? Take Charles Darwin. Both of you are big Darwinians.
Yes.
Charles Darwin had an idea when he was in his 30s or late 20s and sat on it for a really long, he simmered and simmered, and he sat and he sat and he sat. He did not do the hot experiments out loud. He did not go for the dazzle. He did not want to be a star. And that's a model that somehow you guys don't...
No, I think he just thought he had no competition. The moment he heard of Wallace, he immediately published. Yeah. And he was very concerned. So, I mean, he had the advantage of being born very rich.
He didn't want to embarrass Emma either.
I had the advantage of being born very poor.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, it's not
That's
so
not
bad.
fair. I mean, I think another way of reading... Well, let me do it this way. There's two guys here in Harvard named Jeff Lichtman and Joshua Sains, and they went and looked at a brain, and they figured out how to tag neurons, I think now 90 different rainbow colors.
Yes.
So you can sit and you can watch something. I don't think yet we know what we're looking at, but you can watch either muscles moving or maybe even somehow thought. Don't you think that's going to take like 10, 20, 30 years of staring before the next Darwin?
No,
maybe
if they have a bright student, then there'll be a big advance out of it.
So that's how you think it works. You wait for the golden boy or the golden girl.
No, they have a beautiful technique here, and if you have bright students, maybe someone, there are people outside of Harvard who do not think this is the answer to everything, hopefully someone at Harvard will really show it's wonderful.
But aren't there some problems, like problems of how brains work, what mind is,
Yeah.
that might just take 20, 30, 40, 50 years of simple staring, in which case that's going to be...
You should stare some other place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
you
pretty
agree with
boring.
Do you agree with
Well, I'll tell you a story. When Jim and I started getting together, he very kindly invited me down to do an after-dinner speech in neurobiology, of all things, and behavior, at Cold Spring Harbor. We were walking along, and a thought occurred to me, and I said to him, Jim, what is great science? And he said, what does it take to make great science? He said immediately, without pausing at all, great goals. And that's right. An ambitious young scientist is dealing with a different culture than, say, a very ambitious young businessman or entertainer. You are not a scientist, and you don't deserve to be called a scientist unless you have made an original discovery. And you have to make a great discovery if you will be called a great scientist, and you only need to make one. And that way you are forever that. This is, therefore, reason, when you're a young scientist, to decide that if you have a choice among goals, you might as well pick a real big one. If you're going to blow your best years, which are usually, well, and let me tell you this, the rule is, you peak at, if you're a mathematician, you peak at 17. If you're a physicist, you might peak late 20s. If you're a molecular biologist, I'm guessing late 30s.
Yeah.
If you're in evolutionary biology, maybe late 40s. I like to add philosophers never, but so now you've got these good years, right? You've got just so much energy, you just have so many years, you have so many opportunities, so you might as well take a big problem. Let me quote one other great man.
Yeah, I think evolutionary biologists very soon can peak at about 25 because the data is coming in the form of these big databases. You don't have to necessarily go out and collect anymore. You just look at other people's data. So I think there's going to be some big insight.
Jim, I don't believe
I
that
know
one
you
at
would
all.
like to believe, and so would I like to
It's
believe.
not, the databases don't matter. To be really good in evolutionary biology, you have to be a good naturalist, and you have to inhabit the subject. I mean, you have to pick a subject in which you want to live. The distinction I make is between, the two great strategies of doing biology. One is the one that the molecular and cell biologists use, and that's every problem, they recognize every problem. For every problem, there's a species ideally suited to its solution. And the evolutionary biologists are the opposite. So they then pick what they call a model species, like E. coli for molecular. And the inverse of this is what characterizes the evolutionary biologists who work with all the diversity of life. And it says, for every group of organisms, or every organism, there is a problem ideally suited to which it is a solution to which it is ideally suited. So that strategy then, you pick a group, and an ambitious young person then decides, and I always encourage my graduate students to do this, to become the world authority. That's that person's goal. And then become the world authority, and then you will see the great problem you can solve with it.
But here's what worries me. Jim, you wrote recently, I caution young scientists from taking on brain-based behaviors whose essences may be uncrackable over the foreseeable future. Back in the 1950s, you essentially, I think, were saying to the butterfly guys, hold up for a while because we have all this stuff that we're learning and you should wait, just get out of our way, until we're ready. Isn't there, on the one hand, it sort of makes sense, but on the other hand, I wonder whether you are both too fast and not willing to consider the possibility that brain-based behaviors, let's say, how does an animal remember something? It might take 10 or 20 or 30 years, but wouldn't that be a big thing to know?
Of course. But, I mean, you can't, and So at Cold Spring Harbor, where one of our scientists found, about 50 different genes which affected short-term memory and long-term memory and flies. So that's one way to go at it. But you might actually have to wait until the complete anatomy of the fly's brain is done. Now that's going to be done in about 4 years in Taiwan. It's going to be done. So then you'll know what the brain is, and maybe then, you could have an insight. But I'm sort of waiting. Some things, until you knew the two-dimensional structure of DNA, you couldn't do the three-dimensional. We did the three-dimensional within 2 years after the two-dimensional. We couldn't have done it 5 years before. And all I'm saying is that sometimes not all problems are crackable, and just go for something that,
But your partner, Francis Crick, just sat around doing uncrackable things for about 40 years.
Yeah, and he wasted his time.
Ah.
Yeah, I mean, he had, because if it may turn out that some of Francis's speculations turn out to be correct, but the odds are he was just ahead of, he had a goal bigger than the facts to think with. So he didn't have enough to think with, and so was just wasting his time. Now, he had a beautiful house in La Jolla, and he had a nice office, and he had a white Mercedes, so you could say he had, he knew a lot of girls, and so, so you could say, well, he had a good life. Yeah. But as a scientist, I've actually accomplished a lot more than Francis during this period, when Francis was much brighter than I, but I think not as sensible as I am.
All right, on that note, I'm just curious, before we finish with this part of it, how did you both decide to get friendly again? Was it a Charlie Rose moment where the two of you were brought in from stage left and stage right?
No,
I don't know.
Biology, there's no reason for us to fight now.
No.
We sort of know what's up. When you didn't know what's up, you could say that. I'm bored with, people studying DNA replication today. I'm much more interested in what Ed does. Yes.
So you just kind of got more interested.
Yes. No, I am.
I sympathize. Jim needed to bring ashore a much larger mob of Vikings in order to overcome those pesky Celts that were out there, in the land. Okay, so it happened, and I think that we've seen the glory of late 20th century biology is that we're unifying. Yeah. That's basically what's happening.
But I have
meaning that the places where you started have come together, or the folks you hated have now become focal up. Or
I would say, our science has really come together, so we're not fighting each other. We have enemies, and I'm trying to be polite tonight, so I really won't describe how really awful they are. I mean, because they're intellectual crooks.
Okay,
that's all I want to say.
Looking forward quickly, you're writing a novel? Why are you writing a novel?
Oh, it's already in press, yes. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I wrote a book. I've just written a book called, would there be any other title? Anthill. But it's about people. And basically, it's a Southern novel. And I had a double reason for writing it. I wanted to recapture the South I had grown up in, and I wanted to take that fly out of the amber, and I wanted to revisit in fiction and expanding what I could know about it. But I also wanted an instrument for promoting conservation, environment, particularly in the South, where we are very laggard about things like that. And so I thought that since people respect nonfiction, but they read novels, I would better write a novel, and that's what I've done.
I see.
Yeah.
And is it a mystery, a romance? A young boy meets a snake?
It's an epic.
It's an epic. I thought you were trying to write short books.
Yeah, 3 generations. Oh, yes. That's right, yeah.
Well, if you guys were 21 or 20 or 19 right now, what would you dig your teeth into? Assuming, not novelistically, scientifically, what problem would you tackle?
I would try to understand really how the brain works. So I go into neuroscience.
Yeah.
And, but I might say I can't, and I probably get, trained in synaptic cell biology for my PhD. But then I'd probably move on to systems after I got my PhD.
Yeah.
You too?
Jacques, 1971, in his book, The Chance and Necessity. Who was the author? It went right out of my head. Jacques Monod said.
No.
Monod
Yes.
said
no,
in his
yes.
book, I just read it, reread it, so I know that. He said something very clue. He said, the great problems of the biology in the future are going to be at the extreme ends of biology. They're going to be how the brain works to create consciousness, and they're going to be the origin of life. If we're talking about great problems, I would imagine that if you were, make it a 26-year-old, 21-year-olds aren't prepared to think like this, that you would think about that problem of integrative neurobiology, or you would think about the new work that will reveal how life is created, but that's not what I would do.
What would you do?
I would go into microbiology, and I would enter the unknown, virtually unknown world of the prokaryotes, the bacteria and so on. In other words, I would go back to diversity, where virtually everything is unknown, except instead of ants, now I'd be studying germs.
Really? What?
Really?
Why?
Yeah, because my God, it's the same as
Just
landing
because
on
there's so
an
many
unknown.
different kinds?
It's like landing on an unknown planet. Well,
Wait, because you are, one of the thoughts that occurs to me from reading you actually, is that one of the big issues is having spent the 20th century trying to figure out like where things come from, what are the essential building blocks, what is the quark on one hand or the gene on the other, that now, like Humpty Dumpty, we're trying to pull things back together again. So maybe what makes a cell come together and what makes a tissue come together and what makes an organ come together and an organism and a forest and maybe even a city, for all I know, that there might be some rules, but prokaryotes, I don't see.
Probably billions of them. Large number of different rules, so,
Oh, you think there are many, many different
Yeah,
rules?
many rules, so you've got to, I'm not sure I would, you're cataloging everything that's there, and maybe if you're lucky, you'll find some nice rules, but...
Although I do see it in a different way. I think that a lot of biology in the future is going to be synthesis, and it's going to be explaining how the transitions are made, the great transitions, from cell to multiple organism to superorganisms to ecosystems and so on. The fact is that it took 100 million years or more for each one of those steps to be taken. And something very special happened finally. And I don't think we'll really understand why until we work out all those details that you were talking about. But at any moment, there will be a critical mass of information available, and then there will be young people, probably, who suddenly they see the break where it can go, and they can explain it. So that's another area of research.
Why did cells finally decide to make tissue? Or
why did we have hundreds of millions of years of bacteria, prokaryotic organisms, before the first eukaryotic cell came into existence? You'd think with an astronomical number of mutations and cell divisions and so on going on every hour around the biosphere, that you'd go to eukaryotic organs like that. They
do you
didn't
think
show up.
these tipping points might have some common logic?
We don't know what happened or why it took so long, and I call that one of the great remaining problems of science.
Wow, I hadn't even.
Okay.
What about explaining cooperation generally, or why do animals help each other?
Well, that's what I'm working on now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're about to go be bad, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm already with co-authors, including one of our brilliant young biologists here at Harvard. I've been conducting an assault on the traditional theory of kin selection, which has ruled for the last 40 years and hasn't gotten us much at all in 40 years of theory.
So this is the notion that the reason why an ant might work her entire life for some sister ant, you know, nursing and nursing and nursing and nursing and nursing and nursing and nursing, having no babies of her own, is that she's got this genetic attachment to the sister, and so that all those babies will be kind of like her genes, and that's now you're wondering.
Well, we're looking at it in a wholly new way, and what you have to understand was that when ants and termites came into existence, you know, with that kind of altruism, they took over the world. So ants and termites make up maybe 20%, 3% of the species of insects in the world, and they make up 80% of the numbers of individuals and biomass. And it took insects on the world, on the surface, solitary insects, beetles, dragonflies, things called paleodictyopterans and so on, for hundreds of millions of years, until finally, in the Jurassic, the first insects that could make colonies organized like that made their appearance. And when they appeared, they took over the world. Now, that's an interesting biological problem.
You know, danger is, it might be insolvable, at least over a long period of time. So,
maybe, but
you know, I can see it's interesting, but I wouldn't go near it.
What do you think about people who say that computers are going to get smarter and smarter and smarter and smarter, and that life forms and machines will begin to meld, and it'll be there will be more and more designed life. The life will have more and more machines in them, and then one day the machines will all learn how to make baby machines, and they'll be so smart that they will somehow just move off in their, leaving us sort of wilted behind, and then leaving biology departments and biology professors sort of waving off at the silicon creatures that are...
I'll be dead before then, so I'm not, it's not worth for me thinking about it.
Because,
you know,
because it's beyond your natural, or because it's dumb? Or is it implausible to you?
I don't think computers will cure cancer. And that's actually, you know, if you wanted to ask, well, really what I want to do, I really think, and I had a, you know, a short piece in the Times which they changed the title. My title was Cure Cancer Today, Not Tomorrow, which really said, let's try and cure it this decade, you know, between 2010 and 2020, and not wait another 10 years just getting government grants and finding out, but actually, you know, see whether you can do it. And I think we might be able to do it. So, you know, if I'll die really happy if, you know, we really can cure most cancer. And I think there's a chance, you know, that we can do it. We found out an awful lot. And you can always say, well, you don't know enough, you just go on and on. But that's really all I want. Well, you know, I really wanted to. I gave a course on cancer at Harvard in 1959 because I was interested in it and thought I had an idea. But there wasn't really, you know, we didn't know enough. And it's 50 years after that course, and I figure, why not? And there's some wonderful work been done over in the medical school, which really, I think, simplifies enormous insight as to, you know, the observation of Otto Warburg in 1924 of aerobic glycolysis in cancer. I think we understand it. We haven't used this understanding to cure cancer. Why not cure cancer? So I like really, you know, big heroic goals. You know, done by a, you know, a dumb kid from the south side of Chicago. You know, it just sort of, you know, why not?
Are you a dumb kid from the south end of Chicago who kind of has a hunch that he's not dumb and has to just prove it every day?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, because deep down I know I'm dumb, so I've got to, you know, fight and show that, you know, I can still outwit my brain. And
Well, let me ask you guys one last question, then I'll invite questions from the audience. One of the issues that sort of lies rather largely on the landscape is we are, I presume, a consistently evolving species, and yet we have pollution problems and global warming problems and perhaps extinction problems that are getting more and more dangerous in feel. And yet we have, as you point out over and over again, we have brains that were largely formed by walking apes from many, many years ago. So we think locally, we think with great feeling, and we don't abstract as easily as a problem like global warming or nuclear proliferation or would. Do you guys think that we have in us the opportunity to take our delicate brains and make them abstract enough, risk-reward weighing enough to get through whatever the next 100 years will bring?
Well, I think we will if we are honest enough and if we're smart enough. And I'll tell you how I like to characterize what the real problem of humanity is right now. I know that's what John Wayne said in one of his movies. That's tall talk from a one-eyed man. But what our problem is the following. Excuse me, Jim. The problem is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, and it's terrifically dangerous. It's now approaching a point of crisis overall. And until we understand ourselves, until we answer those huge questions of philosophy that the philosophers abandoned a couple generations ago, where do we come from, who are we, and where are we going, until we address those rationally, we are running a very dangerous course.
I think differently. I just think we should give higher salaries to smart people. Because I think we're really right now, their intelligence is much more limiting than it was in the past because the problems are harder. Yeah, and the human brain is the same. And so we've got to really reward people for being bright. And I proposed before she was, to your president-elect, that they pay the Faculty of Arts, Harvard pay the Faculty of Arts and Sciences the same as the business school. I did not get a response.
But are you?
And so, because you can say, well, business is what drives our country, and so the people who do it should be rewarded the most. I'm not sure that is going to be the case.
But aren't you impressed by the fact that over the last 80 years or so, I don't exactly know what IQ measures, but the IQs of Americans have gone up and up and up and up and up, even more or less doing by the same measure.
No, that's not true. People mature faster, but there's no evidence that the IQ at age 20 is any different than it was. It's just, kids grow faster.
Is that what you think?
Yep. So I've seen no.
Well, then let me ask it in
look, I just know. And also, if you examine the components of the IQ test, which measure G, general intelligence, that hasn't gone up. It's so you don't take comfort in thinking that the system is producing.
Let me take comfort in a different logic that both of you have described in different ways how human beings 60, 70, 80, 90,000 years ago, where the guys were very big and they had huge teeth, and the ladies were less, and they were pretty violent bunch of folks.
Yes.
And gradually, somehow, the human beings, not unlike dogs as they became friendly with humans, not unlike foxes who got breeded into this recently in Russia, that humans have somehow become gentler.
Yes, we've evolved to be more like babies.
Yes.
Yes, so we've extended childhood into adulthood so that we play instead of kill. And that's very important. There are a few people it doesn't seem to have reached, like the Scotch, you know, the Highlanders. You know, they evolved very late. But the Chinese actually were probably, because they formed civilization before other people, are probably the least violent and the most, you know.
Well, is there a suggestion there that in some funny feedback loop between how we live and how we love and who we murder, which I think they probably got rid of a lot of the Popeyes ganged up against the Blutos, and the Blutos didn't have babies, and then the Popeyes gradually became Alan Alda's somehow, but that there is some mechanism operating that will change us so that we are more fit for the world that we are creating around us? Is that?
Well, they're more fit, but to get along with each other. But we shouldn't just make a point of getting along with people that we shouldn't get along with. So, yeah, I mean, sometimes you got to say this is just crap, and go your own way. So you don't want people completely passive. So you like people who really are capable of disagreeing.
Right.
And that's what you hope a university gives people enough knowledge so that they know enough to disagree intelligently, not just, you know, be asses, but just disagree when the facts do not promote it. But I will go back to the fact, we do not pay intelligent people enough for their intelligence. And, you know, so the reward system, you know, which does wonders if you're a great athlete now, does not do the same if you're a great brain. And this may be, you know, why, you know, the United States is on its way to being like Argentina. You know, woo!
Woo means what? Woo means we're a lot more tangos?
What happened to Argentina?
You mean like inflation and
Well,
instability?
yeah, they were a very good country until about 1914.
And was that the year that they fired all their smart biology professors?
No, I don't. All I'm saying is that you shouldn't take for granted the fact that the United States will always be the most interesting and exciting place in the world, and that we have to really, through education and, you know, religion or whatever way you want to do it, change ourselves so we can survive in a much more difficult world than existed 100 years ago.
On that note, I think because you have here the author of The Double Helix, and you have the author of The Naturalist, and you have probably the mightiest swords in the kingdom for telling people what they don't want to, or don't think they could understand, or don't believe they could ever know. These are the giants, and it was a great privilege to be sharing the stage with them. Thank you all very, very much.